to our webinar. I'm Emily from thinkstep-anz. It's a pleasure to be able to present to you today. We're joined by Vickers, our technical director here at thinkstep-anz, and also Jackson MacFarlane from Hynds. We're going to be talking about how Hynds have used their EPDs to inform their sustainability strategy. I'd like to acknowledge that we recognise the Indigenous peoples in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, who have been observing, understanding and caring for the environment for many generations. We honour the deep knowledge systems of the Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Maori peoples, grounded in connection to land, water, sky and community. Their ways of knowing continue to shape how we understand sustainability, resilience and the balance between people and nature. I will now pass over to our first presenter, Jackson MacFarlane. So Jackson is the Group Sustainability Manager at Hynds, and he's going to walk us through how Hynds used feedback from their internal and external stakeholders to influence their sustainability strategy. So awesome. I'll pass over to Jackson.
Thank you, Emily. And as Emily mentioned, the Sustainability Manager for Hynds Group. And for those that don't know, New Zealand's premier supplier of water infrastructure products. We operate a network of 36 branches across the country, 7 precast concrete manufacturing sites, 2 of which manufacture concrete pipes, 3 plastic manufacturing sites, and then we also have a import and wholesale water infrastructure product group, High Grade Water, which operates both here and in Australia. So we are sort of intimately connected to the water industry, water infrastructure here in New Zealand and a little bit over in Australia. We're still 100% New Zealand family owned with a strong focus on community engagement and support. And that's, really big for us in the sustainability space. That allows us to be a leader in sustainable infrastructure and look at initiatives that sort of long-term complement our business strategy, but maybe don't have an immediate sort of very quick return on shareholder value, which as a sustainability professional is really powerful and important. And that came up back in 2019 when the business wanted to formalize their sustainability approach, their goals, their actions. So they brought in ThinkStep to develop an internal and external survey to try and capture how the business and our customers, what they wanted from us, what we wanted to do, who we wanted to be. And there was really great engagement over this. The internal survey alone generated over 1,200 comments. So there's a lot of work to collate and build sort of a cohesive strategy or approach out of all of that work. And then ThinkStep also helped to run an internal workshop with business leaders from throughout the country, different parts of our business units, to bring all that information together and formalize that into a cohesive strategy. And one of the outcomes for that was the need to hire for my role. So thank you to Jeff that was in that room and advocated for me having a job. But there were also 3 sort of clear messages or priorities that came out of it. One of them was capturing the great work we're already doing. And I believe that if you're an ethical and efficient business or manufacturer, you're already sort of 80% of the way on your sustainability journey. So there was a real emphasis on capturing that mahi, that work, and representing the stuff that people from throughout the business are already doing. There was a desire to develop some new products for a changing climate and society, lower carbon products, climate resilient products. And then for customers that were happy with our products, they still had a desire for better reporting or more reporting around the environmental benefits. So they might be happy with how they're using them, but their customers were now asking them to provide EPDs or other types of environmental reporting. And EPDs was certainly the standout request. So that was sort of all the background for how we got to the information that was going to go into our sustainability framework. And that ended up sort of being grouped into 3 pillars. People, planet, product. Shown here is the current iteration of our sustainability framework. And I realize it's probably maybe a little bit small on screen for some people, and I won't go in a huge amount of detail, but to give you the gist of it, the planet really covers our business's impact on the global and local environment, sort of scope 1 and 2 emissions, waste to landfill, that type of thing. People is how we support and protect our employees and community. And a lot of this is stuff the business was already doing a great job of, but adding in some other specifics around DE, modern slavery. And then product is our products, how it meets our customers' sustainability needs. And it was great to also capture not just the goals, but the what and the why. And that has really immortalized or captured all the work that went through those surveys and the workshops, so that we don't just focus on what we're doing. Originally, this was just a Excel spreadsheet. which we were using internal for the tracking. And then we saw the need to have this more as a one page or something public. And there were 4 really key benefits to taking that step, to making it a public one pager, really easy to digest. One of them, it holds us accountable to our goals. The more we talk about them, the more we do these types of events and tell people what we're planning to do, it's easy to justify continuing to do them. It retains the original what and why. And if you look back, it's been 6 years that we've been on this journey now. A lot of people might have left the business, moved into different roles. So retaining that original lessons that were learned in that process has made it easier to onboard new employees, keep that momentum going. Externally, really easy to communicate the what and the why of our sustainability positions. And that's been great with even some of the low carbon products we have, which people love. It's really easy to show that we're doing this not just as a one-off trying to sell you something special, but it's part of a more holistic sustainability approach. And then signaling to our suppliers our future priorities. You might notice we have scope 1 and 2 targets and not a scope 3. We did measure our scope 3 emissions, and they're dominated by raw materials, cement, steel, plastic, resin. And that's a really hard one as a manufacturer to cut down on without making less stuff. And so that's sort of baked into our desire, our drive to do lower carbon products, more sustainable products, which will lower our scope 3 emissions in the process. And then that signals to our suppliers, hey, this is the journey we're on. We need you to support us. Otherwise, we might have to go elsewhere. And luckily, we have some really great suppliers that have come on this journey. So that's sort of the first half of the spiel around the sustainability framework. And then the EPDs have been a really key part of that. And the first step in that journey was doing a life cycle analysis of our products, specifically the precast concrete products and the plastic pipes we manufacture here in New Zealand. And something that was really apparent straight away was that they're very different. So showing here the global warming potential breakdown of a concrete pipe and one of our solid wall plastic pipes. Starting on the right with the plastic pipe, there's one input, plastic resin. 88% of the carbon footprint comes from that resin. 70% is the transport of that resin. There's no New Zealand manufacturers of plastic resin, so it has to come from overseas. So 95% is just the resin, and the products are already as lean as they can be to make them cost competitive. So there's not much we can do in the plastic pipe space. Whereas when you get to a concrete pipe, 80 to 90% comes from the reinforcing steel and the cement, but you still have a lot of other contributors, other ingredients that go into the concrete, less from the material transport because we have more domestic inputs, still that same 5% overheads. But we also see a huge variety across our product range. We have products that have zero steel reinforcing. So that's going to obviously not have that 43% through to really high amounts of steel reinforcing. And that means that fitting them into a single EPD is very tricky, and that we custom make a lot of precast concrete products. So having them in static documents is very hard. So this step was key to both understanding our products better. It also has made us a more efficient manufacturer, but then it's also been a massive step in deciding how we're going to document it and publish our carbon footprints. So that's led to 2 strategies. One is to go down having published EPDs for our standard product ranges, and we've done that now for both plastic and concrete pipes. And then the other part is having a dynamic carbon calculator for our precast concrete products. And that is built off the back of the calculations that went into our EPDs. Same calculations, it's just instead of having it published, it's a dynamic Excel spreadsheet or online tool that we can look at customized products, but then we can also, as we look at new ingredients into our concrete, incorporating waste materials, other things that we can do in the future, it's easier to get more accurate carbon footprints by building them into that calculator. So our outputs, what can we do for our customers now? I mentioned we have EPDs. We have 4 concrete pipe EPDs, 2 plastic pipe EPDs that have been verified and published. We have our Hynds PKS spiral round pipe EPD, which has just officially been verified as of today, so will be out very shortly. That will be the first spiral wound EPD in Australasia. Our concrete jacking pipe EPD was the first concrete jacking pipe EPD in New Zealand. And then we have another 22 precast concrete EPDs that are just going through verification now. So that's concrete pipes and precast concrete products across the country. So a huge amount of work to put those out, and that covers a large range of our standard products, really easy for our customers to get that information quickly. But then we can also, from our dynamic calculator, provide a sort of an EPD-like document, a PDF that documents specific products. We can compare the global warming potential of specific products, our low carbon options, which is great when our customers are optioneering, trying to figure out the pros and cons of different products. We can still have a lot of the background information about how they were calculated, but then referring back to the EPD where a lot of that original LCA background information is. So I realize throwing a lot of information there, it's been a really big journey, and it's all starting to come together really nicely, but we're still improving, learning as we go, and that shows up in our framework where we're on our second version of it. Minor changes, but it's great having a document we can still adapt as the sustainability landscape changes, what our customers want change, global national regulations. So we are seeing some minor changes around prioritizing climate resilient infrastructure, circularity, and not just carbon footprint. So yeah, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, but for now I'll pass over to Jeff.
Thank you, Jackson. Just get my slides up just a moment. And it's funny to look back on a workshop from 2019. Just reminds me that we used to do all of those workshops in person pre-COVID and how things changed in a very short space of time. So nice to see some old images. I wanted to talk today about a few things. Firstly, trends in EPD development. What are some of the things that are happening in the market? I also want to talk about the value of EPDs, both for construction products and non-construction products. And I want to talk about how EPDs link to corporate footprinting, corporate carbon footprinting, and also corporate strategy. I think there's often a disconnect, at least in my mind, when I sort of talk to people in the market. There seems to be a disconnect between this view of the kind of corporate version of a company and then the products and services it produces. And for me, it's always sort of seemed logical that the company is kind of made up of the products and services it produces, and so the link between the two needs to exist, and it's an important link, but it's one that often seems to get overlooked. So I just want to talk about that a little bit today. In terms of trends first, I think for construction products, if you look out there in the market, you'll see that the first movers have already moved. So if we're looking at like a standard adoption of innovations type curve like this one, we're probably into the late majority, or possibly in some cases the early majority, depending on the particular type of construction product we're talking about. But there's a lot of EPDs out there. I think EPD Australasia celebrated its 2000th EPD recently, and internationally there are many, many more, and I'll cover that on my next slide. But effectively, there's a move in the construction industry that we see now, a move away from being the first mover, using it as a marketing advantage, to being now more of a compliance document that's required through tenders. And there's a focus and a shift in focus away from just having a number to having a number that is relatively low, to one that is, being actively requested in tenders, and in some cases in tenders where there are also thresholds being set. We want our concrete to be below a certain carbon footprint per cubic meter, or our steel below a certain carbon footprint per ton, or whatever it happens to be. But for every other product type that's not construction, we're really at this early adopter stage. For most other product types, we just don't have the same kind of demand or drivers. If you look to the EPD market and you see the numbers that are produced for construction products, this is a worldwide graph that's produced by a former colleague, Jane Anderson. It was last updated in January 2024, and you can see that there are, at that time, almost 24,000 EPDs for construction products produced according to the standard EN 15804. I should mention that this is just the individually verified EPDs. It excludes the tool produced EPDs where there are far more, and it also excludes EPDs produced to the sister standard ISO 21930, and that's widely used in North America. If you included all of those, there are hundreds of thousands of EPDs for construction products in the world today, and as I say, more than 2,000 just under EPD Australasia alone. In terms of why is construction so far ahead, I think there's two main reasons. The first is that EPDs are recognized directly under many green building and green infrastructure rating tools. So whether that's Green Star, whether that's the infrastructure sustainability rating scheme, whether that's the newer Neighbours Embodied Carbon tool in Australia, these tools often give recognition for EPDs, whether that's points or contributing to points, or just the need to have an EPD to get your numbers into the tool. There is a way of directly recognizing EPDs, and so they're being produced for that reason. The other reason that they contribute is that they're providing the data that you need to be able to calculate the footprint of the asset that you're trying to assess. So whether it's a building or a bridge or a tunnel or whatever, EPDs give you the numbers that you need to calculate and sum them all together to get to the impact of that asset that you're looking at. And so they provide two important things: One, they contribute in terms of transparency and providing data, and two, they're contributing in terms of actually those numbers being used to calculate the carbon footprint of the asset itself. We're also seeing a significant number of project-specific requirements, state and local government requirements. I saw an example just a couple of days ago of a project in Australia that was looking at 80% of all materials by value having EPDs, just as an example. So there's significant change in the market to looking at requesting EPDs for construction. In terms of other product types, there's one core underlying theme of why EPDs are useful, and it's that your products, the products that you make or supply to your customers, are your customers' Scope 3 emissions. So EPDs provide a verified carbon footprint for a product or service that your customers can use when they're evaluating and improving upon their own corporate carbon footprint. Because they are verified and they're pulling together lots of data in one place, they're providing a degree of trust as well, which is important for customers, many of whom are now increasingly getting their carbon accounts audited. I think there's still a bit of a disconnect though when it comes to looking at things from a corporate perspective to looking at things from a product perspective. And a graph that we often use, or a diagram we often use within ThinkStep, is this particular one looking at corporate Scope 3 carbon footprinting. You've got your Scope 1 emissions here, all your direct emissions from your facilities, manufacturing sites, offices. It's from your vehicles and other mobile plant. It's from, direct emissions of refrigerants, emissions from fertilizers in agriculture, or whatever it happens to be. All the direct emission sources, those are relatively well understood by companies. Companies also well across their Scope 2 emissions from purchased electricity and other purchased energy. And then there's kind of these big buckets of the Scope 3 emissions, the indirect upstream stuff, so the stuff you're buying, employee commuting, energy, whatever it is, and the downstream stuff like use of your sold products and downstream end of life of sold products and all the other things that happen kind of after your business. And so there's this kind of corporate lens that gets applied. And then when we look at it from a product perspective, it's sort of framed slightly differently. So the manufacturer still sits in the middle somewhere near the middle, but you've got different types of ways the information is coded. So these A1, A2, A3 codes at the bottom come from the EPD standards and are a common way of breaking up the life cycle of construction products. But we're looking at things in a slightly different way. And importantly, we're not looking at buckets of emission sources within one company. We're looking at the emissions that are directly attributable to one product or process flow. And so we're cutting the same, data up in different ways. But importantly, when you look at that product lens, you can also overlay the corporate lens on top. And so your Scope 1 and 2 emissions are those that are linked to your manufacturing sites. We don't have the offices in here so much because product and service related EPDs or lifecycle assessment tends to focus on those that are directly attributable to the process or product that's flowing through. So things like an R&D department or a marketing department are kind of considered overheads that don't necessarily get attributed to the products. But everything else, the upstream purchase goods and services, the upstream transport, the downstream transport, the use of the sold products, the end of life of the sold products, all of that same stuff that's in your Scope 3 corporate carbon footprinting is also in your product carbon footprinting. And importantly, like that point I mentioned before, your emissions, the emissions to the point you get to your customer, they're your customer's Scope 3 emissions. And so increasingly we're seeing EPDs used to be able to provide the data needed for bigger customers to be able to calculate their own footprint. And recently we had a webinar with BlueScope Steel, for example, where they mentioned that when you've got a supplier with an EPD, it just makes the life of the corporate carbon footprinting person so much easier, because rather than having to use, say, a spend-based factor or a sort of a proxy for something, you can use specific data to your supplier's product that they're actually providing you, and you can get that specific information. And that's really important, particularly when that thing is a significant part of your overall inventory. So the more you can provide that information to customers, the more they're going to appreciate that, and the more that you can kind of, work with them to all decarbonize together. But EPDs and the technique that underlies it, which is called lifecycle assessment, also have other benefits. And I think those benefits can flow through to a broader business strategy as well. And so when you look at the life cycle of a product, you look at it typically either in a linear or circular way. You're starting from raw materials, resources, you process those into semi-finished products, you manufacture a final product, you distribute it to customer, the customer uses it, and then there's some kind of end of life, which might be landfill or incineration, or it might be recycling or reuse. And then those reused and recycled materials become the kind of next product life cycle. But if we look at the the benefits of kind of going through this process. When you do life cycle assessment, what you're doing is usually pulling together a team of people across the whole organization. So people have to be able to provide information for each one of these stages. You need the person who handles your procurement. You need your manufacturing manager. You need the person who handles logistics. You need the people that are doing the marketing, the selling the products, how they're used in market. You need the people that handle compliance at end of life. And when you bring all those people together and you put them, you give them a shared purpose of trying to understand what is the footprint of this product over its whole life, you start to get kind of secondary benefits. So when you're focused on resources, you can focus on responsible procurement, which can help you to reduce risk in your supply chain. When you're focused on processing, you can then look at how could we improve product development to make this thing a different way and reduce impact in that way. When you're looking at manufacturing and focus on bringing everyone together, you can better engage your staff and you can improve productivity. When you're looking at and working with your downstream distribution logistics partners, you can get better engagement with them and you can improve supply chain resilience, which, I mentioned COVID at the start of this presentation. That was an incredibly important thing several years ago, not too long ago, where those who had the best relationships with their logistics operators probably got served better than others. If you're focusing on use, you can improve marketing, you can market better environmental credentials, for example, and that can help you to work on revenue growth or even just maintaining current market share. If you're focused on end of life, you can be looking at strategies for how can we improve and contribute to a more circular economy, which can help to comply with regulation. And so through a combination of reducing risk, increasing resilience, improving productivity, engaging staff, you can really link in the life cycle assessment and EPD process into helping to create business value. And with that, I would like to hand back to Emily and open up for our Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Jackson. Very enlightening as always. We are in the Q&A section for the next few minutes of this webinar. So the first presentation mentions ISO 9011. What does ISO 9011 cover?
Those 3 ISOs cover quality, environmental, and sustainability. So there's a whole suite of ISO standards that sort of cover all of that. A lot of the really big in the construction and manufacturing sector.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackson. As we wait for a few more questions to roll through, I had another one for you actually, Jackson, so you can stay unmuted. When you were doing your internal and external surveys with stakeholders, what did you find that was the most surprising to yourself or to Hynds overall?
That's a good question. I will admit that I was not there for that full process, so Jeff might have some memories as well. What's surprising? I would say probably just the wide range of thoughts, perspectives. Everyone comes with some baggage when you bring up sustainability, when you bring up a lot of these topics, and so that then means there's some preconceived ideas of priorities or what should be done, and so you end up with a very, very wide range, and people start bringing up things we wouldn't really think in the sustainability space. But then when you think about it, I guess within social sustainability that should be considered, and then you sort of think about the limited resources you have to put towards sustainability, how wide you want your scope to go, where you want to consider it. But I think that was probably a surprise, was how much people cared about how many things, and so where we wanted our priorities to lie.
One thing I remember from the time as well is that I know the Hynds Group owns quite a lot of land, and one of the things in your strategy was about your tree planting program. And I remember at the time there was a significant program planting native trees around various sites. And there was a question there of, whether the carbon that's stored in those trees could be counted or could be used as a kind of a partial carbon offset. And I probably rained on that parade a little bit at the time to say, it was difficult, particularly at that time. And so, and also given that environmental product declarations don't really allow offsets in any way. But I think there was a genuine interest about how we could do more around, restoring the environment, particularly around the sites. And I know the tree planting program kind of went ahead anyway, even when I did rain on the parade a little bit at the time. And I think that sort of shows the commitment of the business to do some of this good stuff regardless.
Yeah, I can confirm the tree planting still going ahead, and then the question of can we claim some credits for this comes up like clockwork every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, but it's a good thing to do regardless, right? And I think it's an important thing for the business.
Yep, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time. I don't think we've got any more questions coming through, so we can probably wrap up there. Just as we do, we've got a few upcoming webinars as well. I've just posted a few registration links in the chat. So we've got our Carbon Clarity webinar on the 12th of June. This will be internal with Nicole and Barbara from ThinkStep. So if you're keen to register for that, the link is now live. So get into it. And our other webinar is a creating sustainability roadmap for the hospitality industry with Hospitality New Zealand. And that will be on the 28th of June. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you all there. And yeah, thank you for your time, Jeff and Jackson, for presenting today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We have many more webinar replays on a whole host of sustainability topics. You can check them out on our website and our YouTube channel.